Hello and welcome to this very quick tutorial on how I machine my pleats into my curtains. This is probably the wrong way round. I should have probably done a tutorial about how I actually put my buckram into my curtain first, but I'll follow that on. It's just that I had this one on the table and I thought it was the ideal opportunity really to show you what I do and how I do it. Very quick almost obvious thing that I'm going to talk to you about is that a lot of people measure their pleats when they're putting it under the machine. I don't. I measure my gap. The gap is king, really. If you don't have your gaps correct, then it's not going to fit the pole. So you can get away with maybe 1 or 2 mil less on a pleat. It's not going to show. But if you don't get your gaps correct and you don't measure your gaps properly, it's never going to be the finished completed width that you want it to actually be. So that's just something that I do that I think is probably worth going on to. As I say, unless it's a cartridge pleat and you've got one enormous pleat and one small pleat, which you won't have because you're only talking about small increments. But on a wide curtain, if you nip in, 2 mil on each pleat, on each gap, by the time you get to the end, you're actually short. So just measure your gaps, and I'm going to pause the video like I normally do. I'm going to get you a bit closer because obviously you'll need to see exactly what I'm doing and how I do it and how I mark them out, and then I'll show you how I also machine them and what I do if there's a very thick pleat that your machine is struggling with, or maybe you keep breaking needles on it. There is something that you can do to just ease that along a little bit and just to make it work. So I'm going to pause the video now and I'm going to get you a bit closer. See you in a minute. Okay, welcome back. So I've got it on the table here. Now what I do is I have a machine on my table. So I don't have a industrial machine. Because I want my curtain, this is a big curtain, I'll sort of move the camera around a little bit. This is a 3-width curtain, so it's big and heavy and I want it supported on the table. And what I've done is I have marked out my pleats and my gaps with pins. So my pleats are quite big, they're about 17 centimetres, it's going to be a double pleat and it's a big curtain, I want them nice and chunky. And then my gaps are 13. Now, my optimum gap is between 13 and 13 and a half because it gives you enough to sort of push that plain piece back and makes them hang nicely. So what I do, especially when you've got a lot of them to actually mark out, is I put a pin where my pleat is. Then if you get to the end and you haven't quite got enough fabric for the next pleat or whatever it is, because sometimes you end up by being short, you can go back and you can see that you haven't got 2 pleats sitting next to each other, because often that happens where you're not concentrating and a phone call goes or whatever and you've missed it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take that pin out and I'm going to fold it across. I'm hoping this is not going to be too wobbly. I think you need to be close, but hopefully it's okay. And I'm going to line these 2 pins up. So I've got one on top of the other here. Make sure that's nice and straight. Make sure this is straight. Okay. And then I'm going to feel under the buckram and I'm going to put a pin beyond here, underneath that buckram, like that, and that then holds it and stops it wobbling around, and now you can do your machine line. So what I'm going to do, because my gap is king, is I'm going to go from my last stitch line and I'm going to measure 13 because that's where it is. So I'm going to pop the pin in there and then I'm going to move my rule around And I'm going to line that up with my pins at the top. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to lightly score it. I don't use pen, I don't use chalk, I don't use anything like that, because if you need to do an adjustment, it is almost impossible once you've drawn it to do that. So if you decide that you need to have a bit more width on it or what have you, then it's almost impossible. I can still see that. I'm not sure whether it's come through on the camera, but I can see it enough. So I'm going to bring it under my machine, and I apologise if this is a bit wobbly. As I say, I thought you needed to see it closer, but maybe. And I go from the bottom. All my curtain is being supported on my table. So I'm going to go just a couple of stitches backwards and forwards like you normally do. Take my pins out. Go backwards. There we go. One lot done. I'm going to stop it again now. I'm going to go on to the next one, and I'm going to show you what I do if it's very bulky, or if you get to the end where you've got too many thicknesses and your machine has struggle going through it. So I'm just going to pause it now. Hi. So I did that one that was close up. I'm hoping it's come out okay. I'll know in a minute when I watch it back. What I'm going to show you now is if you've got a really thick piece of fabric, or you get to the end where you've got, you've got quite a bit of bulk because it's turned under, and that bit is really tough to get into the machine, and the machine keeps stopping, or you break needles, and it's really frustrating. One of the things that you can do, which really does help, is I've got my pin in here, so the top's lined up and it can't move anywhere, and I'm going to score where I need to stitch. So I'm going to measure 13 for my gap, so I'm there. Turn that around, mark that. There we go. Now before I put it under the machine here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to press it. So just give it a little bit of steam, because what that does is that then makes the buckram really soft, opens up the fibres, and what you'll find is when you put it under your machine, it just goes through like butter. So it's really is lovely. You can feel the difference actually. It's amazing. I mean, obviously you don't need to do it on everything that you ever do, but it certainly helps if you've got a very, very thick fabric. And that's it, really. I know a lot of people use clips and bulldog clips. That's fine, however you want to do it is fine. I just thought I'd show you the way that I do it, because when you come to press it open and sew your pleats, it's just nice and easy. And as I say, if you're not then marking that with a pencil or a bit of chalk or something, it's a few seconds to sew that. You can keep your eye on that line. It's not difficult just to be able to do it. And as I say, as long as you've got more than you need and not less than you need, then you're fine, which is why I measure the gaps. And it just works. So let me know how you get on, whether it's different from what you are currently doing at the moment. And but once you've got it flat and once you've got it supported on the table, I know a colleague of mine, she has an industrial, and she has her industrial next to her table so that she can do it the same way. She can support the curtain on the table. If you sew it the other way around, if you try and sew it from the top down, you've got all the curtain in front of you, And that just causes huge pull, and that also is not kind to your machine, because what it's doing is it's pulling on that needle, and the needle is then hitting in the wrong place when it goes into the bobbin case, and it's hitting on the metal, and that will break your needle quicker than anything. So if you can, sew it from the bottom of your pleat up. As I say, as long as you put a pin in underneath, it keeps it all in place. And if it's, I mean, that's very, very close. But if it's just slightly dipped, you know, if you're doing a double pleat, you can manipulate that. It's not a problem. And hopefully just doing that little tweak of sewing it from the bottom up will just be a little bit easier for you. And I'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.